That's right. Can you hear us? Yes. Okay, good. Hey, everybody. So we're going to talk about the NgRx evolution through the past, present, and future, and how NgRx was coming along with the ride with Angular and TypeScript and its improvements. But before that, again, I will just quickly introduce ourselves.
Yeah, so I'm Brandon Roberts, maintainer of NgRx, creator of Analog.js, and yeah, happy to be here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marko Stanimirović. I'm a core member of NgRx team and GD in Angular.
And I'm Okrushko. I'm a front-end lead at Snowflake. And we're very excited to talk about this. But let's start at a specific point in time. Let's start back to 2019. And this is a very interesting moment because that was the time where I was giving a presentation about NgRx. And NgRx has a very interesting journey already. And I was sharing my journey. At 2019, I was sharing my journey and my feelings, how I feel about NgRx, how the community, how the sentiment that I think that the community had about NgRx in general. And I'll start at the point of 2017. This is where I was working on Google at Firebase. And I was running into complex scenarios where I really needed state management. And I keep seeing the same spaghetti code all over and over again. Services, injecting other services and stuff like that. So there was complex scenarios. And this is where was my first experience with NgRx. I didn't start from the beginning, but this is when I first met NgRx in those early journeys. And again, that yellow line is, I think, is a sentiment in the community, how community feels about NgRx in general, how they like it or not. If you see it going up, that means that there's more exciting and build-up. So I think the most excitement and build-up was almost at 2018. NgConf, which you probably have heard about it, right? It's probably one of the largest Angular conferences in the world. It had a whole day, the whole track of NgRx topics. So excitement was very much up. Everybody was talking about it. Everybody, liked it and wanted to try to use it. But then we see some things start to shift, right? People are concerned about overuse of things, that it might be not the best thing. Maybe we're abusing it a little bit. And you can see the sentiment starts going down when I'm not using NgRx, when I'm not ready for NgRx, why I stopped using NgRx. Because I think, again, people were not using sometimes for its intended purpose. And I think this all kind of culminated down to one other specific moment, also in the NgConf, where, the recommendation was, hey, don't use Redux like ketchup, right? Don't put it everywhere, basically. So, and why in 2019? Because when I was giving this talk back in 2019, I felt that was the lowest point for me within the NgRx story. And I was analyzing at that time, where would we go? Where would we go from there? And my thought was, hey, I think I know where we're going to go. I think we're now at that point where we realize the value. We realize where we can use it for and not use it for. And it will go up from there. But there's a certain reason why I have that thought. And that's the reason is Amara's law. And what Amara's law is saying is that we tend to overestimate the effect of the technology in a short run and underestimate in the long run. And I think that's what we're doing. And the other thing that made me to believe that way is it's something called Gartner hype cycle. And you've seen it all over, be it, I don't know, Bitcoin, be it whatever, right? There's always a hype cycle. There's a peak of inflated expectations. And I think that's where we were with NgRx as well. Going to the all the way down about it. And then we're in the plateau of productivity at the moment. That's how I felt. So that was from 2019. Where are we now? We're in 2024. Where are we now? Well, according to our downloads at least, we're doing very strong. For example, you can see here NgRx, the global store, we now have 3 state management libraries within the NgRx package. The global store, which probably most of you know, love or don't love, right? It's there, but it's used heavily. Over 600,000 downloads. Component Store, our first local state management solution, is doing strong. It's the second most popular states management solution with 180,000 downloads per week. And our newest package, NgRx Signals with the Signal Store, is doing very, very strong growth, and it's just crossed over 50,000 downloads as well. With that, this is just a little bit of introduction. So we'll go over with the past, the present, and the future, starting from Brendan. Go ahead, Brendan.
Yep. Thanks, Alex. So yeah, talking about NgRx, the early days. I always wish I had like a harp or something I could play when we go get all nostalgic and go back in time and talk about NgRx and things. But for some of you who may not know, NgRx was founded by Rob Warmald, who was a former Angular team member at Google. So he wanted to start this project. Rob was involved in a lot of things, but he was an early champion for RxJS at Google and even in Angular, and kind of influenced a lot of the projects and things that they kind of worked on, including the early HTTP. He was involved in an early HTTP package and even Angular elements. So very influential in the community, or even before Angular, even in the Angular JS days. And like I said, ended up founding NgRx. But the biggest question is, why did he create NgRx in the first place? Angular was still very early on in its life cycle, but why did we put these teams together at that point in time? One of the biggest reasons was there wasn't a state management solution in Angular at the time. We were still learning out the framework, still building out these patterns and ideas and things, but we needed something that people could build and ship apps with. And there was also Redux that was very popular in other ecosystems and had a proven track record of its usage and its abilities to allow people to build on top of it. And this was early days on with RxJS integration in Angular. This was before it became very integrated in with the framework and other areas there. So the idea was to combine the reactivity of RxJS with Angular primitives at the time, because, like I said, we were using RxJS, we had this Redux pattern, and want to kind of blend those two things together to create this reactive system for Angular. And one of the biggest points is this was an independent open source project outside of Google. So Rob went through a lot of process and things to make sure that this project could be fully maintained and built outside of Google and maintained by core contributors and more community focused from the beginning. So if we go back to NgRx 1.0, you can, if you want to go back in time and look at the old commits, early project days, you can go to this GitHub repository. Rob famously put this together in a weekend, which he affectionately claimed he was using some of California's finest when he put this thing together. But he put it together in a weekend, had an initial implementation together that it was just a store itself. It didn't have any side effects. There wasn't any router integration. There was store dev tools, but it was store dev tools was a part of it, was actually a component that you dropped into your application, but not like a full-on browser connection to a browser extension. So that brings us further down the line, contributors to maintainers. Mike Ryan, one of the co-creators of NgRx and early contributor, and myself, started contributing to the project and eventually went from contributors and built a lot of things there and became maintainers of the project early on to help shepherd the project moving forward. And some of the things that we landed in NgRx 1.x after the initial release was a more proper integration with store dev tools, where we connected to the Redux dev tools extension in Chrome and or the browser extension itself. One really big feature was feature lazy loading, to where you could load features, load slices of state lazily, as opposed to having to eagerly load everything up front, which was relatively, I would say, groundbreaking for NgRx because that's something that wasn't necessarily in the initial design of Redux itself. So let's look at some early syntax. I don't know how many, we might have some OGs in here that remember these days when we had action classes and enums and consts for defining variables and everything. And we also had, for reducers, we had switch statements, we had case statements. We were putting these actions and unions together. And I know this syntax looks fantastic. I mean, like, wow, it was so great. I just love it. But on a serious note, that was just how we've evolved a lot since then, of course. So, and of course, we show this early syntax of how this was back. Well, I say this like this a long time ago, but it's only been a short time for using modules. So we use store module for root and for feature to manage registration of the store. There was also NgRx effects. So NgRx effects was a library to manage side effects for NgRx store. But some of you may not know that there was a library that came before NgRx effects called NgRx store sagas. But it was also a side effect model for NgRx store, but it had a little bit different behavior as it was based more around middleware for the store. And it was modeled after a library called Redux Sagas, which we initially implemented, but ended up deprecating and removing support for that because it just changed the mental model a good bit. But like I mentioned, all these things are on GitHub. You can go look at them and see what those libraries look like and that. So if we come back to NgRx effects, we went back to the drawing board and said, what does this side effect model look like for NgRx store? So we had the NgRx effects became the successor to store sagas, and it basically completed this reactive cycle in NgRx, where we can model these side effects after model these side effects for the store. And there was other libraries that came along around about that time, such as Redux Observable, that had similar patterns to NgRx effects. And you can go to the GitHub repo for NgRx effects. And this was before we moved everything into the NgRx platform mono repo and kind of moved everything along there. And once again, this was early days of NgRx effects. We were using decorators back then, just like everyone else. But we'll kind of get into how this kind of evolved over time. But looking at, like I said, not much has changed in the early syntax of NgRx effects outside of the decorator, but you can, like I said, go back in time and see how it even worked back then. There's also NgRx router store, which is another library that we ended up developing to round out the libraries that came within NgRx. So NgRx router store was a way to connect the Angular router to the NgRx store and provide an observable of router state and other things that were traditionally you could get some of that information as an observable from the router. You could get some of these things as snapshots, but this is just another way to integrate some more of the Angular ecosystem within NgRx together. There's also NgRx entity, which is a library that manages collections and has an adapter. We use an adapter pattern there to help you manage these collections. But one really interesting thing was that we ended up talking to the Redux toolkit maintainers and had conversations with them back and forth. And NgRx entity, a version of it, even got backported to the Redux toolkit. So it initially developed this library in NgRx and then ended up impacting other ecosystems also. Along the way, our team continued to grow in NgRx also. Tim DeShriver, who was an early contributor, and Alex Okrushko. I still remember those early days when Alex he like pinged me on like a Sunday, I think it was, trying to get the dev tools working, and that kind of sparked our initial encounters there, and that kind of grew from there. And he ended up, becoming a contributor along with Tim and others. But I still remember those early days. There's also NgRx schematics. which is a scaffolding tool used for the official schematics package from NgRx, where you could generate code for store, effects, entity, all these things just out of the box. And all these things kind of led us up to a certain point in time, which was NgRx version 7. So this was one of the initial pivot points in the lineage of NgRx that kind of brings us to a nice point in time where Alex mentioned we had this kind of transition period where we were introducing new things, and things continued to happen there.
All right, yeah. That was an interesting conversation back then. Again, as I told you, I brought the NgRx library within Google and started using it within Firebase, and I ended up maintaining the whole library for the entire Google at the end of the day. Yeah, that was fun. Anyhow, V7 was the major things for us. And we kept, NgRx was there. It was working. A lot of things were completely new and innovative, like Brendan just described. But we still keep hearing the same word that's coming up.
I wonder what that word is. I wonder, is it boilerplate?
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. Action is just really just a simple interface. It's a simple object, but if you have a payload and all these things, it grows a little bit, right? So you have to write a lot of code for it, and it's quite a lot of code for something that should feel light and very easy to create, right? We had the payload interface, we had the const for types that we were using across in reducers and effects. We had the class itself to initialize this. You can't really
so
trace
great.
that. Yeah.
Great.
It was beautiful, beautiful. And we thought, okay, we can do better. We can do better, and we did. With the help of our TS action library from Nicholas Jameson that we got inspired by, we removed this to this. Much better, right? Much better. So as you can see, but it's not only because we decided to do it this way. It was also a lot of advancements in TypeScript itself that allows us to do this. We can stricter type things. We can infer a lot of things. And we were always in the forefront of what the TypeScript can do to make our library better as well. So this was a major milestone. Create action. Create effect and create reducer followed up with this, right? So we introduced those as well. Create reducer, smaller, no switch statements, now on functions. Create effect was a whole other revolution. We had before, as Brendan has demonstrated, we had the effect decorator. And the effect decorator was the only decorator that we were using, and we didn't feel it was right. The reason why we didn't feel it was right is because in Angular, those decorators, the component decorator, the input decorator, the output decorator, they're not really used as decorators. They're not used as a JavaScript decorator syntax, or actually TypeScript construct. What it actually was is just annotations. Because before it can even reach the TypeScript compiler, Angular compiler would already take care of this and would do its own things with this. And we'll remove it from the code, actually, right? So we really wanted to get rid of that as well. So we got rid of effect decorator with a create effect function. Again, a lot of advancements during that V7 phase. But that was not it. That was not just that. Because, again, as I was saying, I was working at Firebase at that time. And we always had some internal discussions as well, within the NgRx team and within the Firebase team. We had certain problems that were very hard to fit in the existing NgRx model at that time, which is it's a globally shared state management solution, right? The entire state was globally shared. We had complex components that have a lot of internal state, like these graphs, for example, very interactive. They have their own state, and they have no business in sharing that data outside of those components. So we were struggling with this notion. You have to put something in the global state for something that's 100% local, right? This is what led us to create a need for this local state, and we created component store, which also were introduced in NgRx. It had no actions. It was also tying to the life cycle of the component. And it becomes a simple interaction which still, proper state management. And this was, again, a standalone package that we introduced in NgRx Component Store. The way you would use it, again, very simple. You'll have an injectable class that extends component store. And some of you are probably using it, right? Because there's a lot of downloads. And then you would put it into the providers of a component. And this would tie the life cycle of that store to the life cycle of that component. So if you have multiple instances of those components, each one will get its own, right? And this is also the other interesting time. We had one more contributor who turned to the core team, and this is Marko. Marko joined our team roughly at that time. This is also the time where, Ivy was kind of wrapped up already. It introduced a lot of things, enabled Angular from within to do certain things. But this also introduced the inject function. And funny enough, inject function wasn't even available for us as developers at the beginning once they wrapped up the Ivy migration. It was actually a bug fix by Alex. He's like, oh, by the way, this doesn't work in the component constructors. Like, he has the bug fix for this. You can see the inject function was introduced with Ivy to support injection and stuff like that, right? So this was an interesting thing. And I don't think even Angular team could predict how much innovation this will spark. I remember those conversations on Twitter and Slacks and all this stuff. It was amazing.
I remember I go quick shout out to Chow. I remember me and Chow were talking with Alex about this small bug fix that was going to enable a lot. So yeah, definitely had a lot of impact.
We have a Slack with Angular team, and I remember there was a big thread about this internally. It was really cool. But that enabled so much innovation, again, even within NgRx. The whole signals is available because of that, but we'll get to that in a second. But one of the early things that we were using, again, this was actually one of the Marko's first contributions, or one of the first contributions, is the functional effects. Right before that, effects had to be within the class as just some random properties. Why? Because there's no other way we can inject things into Angular, right? You can only do it through the constructor of the class. This is now made available through just inject functions. So these could be functional effects with a functional true there. And that led to another change. Angular introduced signals, and that means that we had to adjust as well, right? We adopted, and that gets us to NgRx signals. Marko.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, let's now talk about the latest addition to the NgRx set of libraries, NgRx signals. It's a standalone library that provides a reactive state management solution and also a set of utilities for Angular signals. Here we can see the preview of APIs provided by the NgRx signals package. And two most important and most popular ones are signal state and signal store. So let's first talk about signal state. It's a lightweight utility for managing signal-based state in Angular components and services in a concise and a minimalistic manner. It actually has very similar signature to Angular signal. We can call a signal state function and provide the initial value or initial state as an input argument. But there is one big difference. You can notice here that for each state property, signal state will create a deeply nested signal automatically. The good thing is that this will not happen eagerly. On the contrary, this will happen when we request the deeply nested signal for the first time. The creation will happen at that point. The next and the most popular API probably from the NgRx signals package, the reason why we created NgRx signals package is API called signal store. It's a fully featured state management solution that provides native support for Angular signals and offers a robust way to manage application state. To create a signal store, we can use a function with the same name from the NgRx signals package. And with signal store, we can add state slices, computed signals, and methods to create it. So to add a state, we can use with state feature that accepts the initial state as an input argument. And similar to signal state, with state will also create deeply nested signals for each state property, so we don't need to do that manually. The second base feature is called with computed, and it's used to add computed signals. to the signal store. The third one is with methods, and yeah, we can use with methods to add updaters and side effects to the signal store. And the last one, the fourth one, is called with hooks. With hooks gives us the ability to define some logic that will be executed when our signal store is initialized or destroyed. As a result, signal store function returns a dynamic service. It returns an injectable. So we can provide it. If we want to, for example, manage the local state of the to-dos component, we can add it to the providers array there. Then we can inject it in a component class and use it as any other service. We can consume its methods, signals, generated state signals, as well as computed signals. But you may be wondering all the time, why is signal store functional? Because most, at least so far, most of the local state management solutions are class-based. And let's talk about this. So the first thing is NgRx has been actually functional since the early days. If you remember, when some other state management solutions appeared, their main argument against NgRx was like, NgRx is not Angularish enough. It does not use object-oriented principles. It does not use decorators and things like that. But if we now take a look at the direction of the Angular framework, with the new input and output APIs, with functional guards and resolvers, signal APIs, new lifecycle hooks, we can realize that NgRx was just a bit ahead of time, right? And the main reason actually is that we didn't use class-based approach because we don't like classes. That's not the reason. The reason is class-based approach has limitations that cannot be easily overcome in our case. Let's now see what are the limitations that I'm referring to. So the first one is typing. It's not possible in TypeScript to define dynamic class properties or methods that are strongly typed. The second one is tree shaking. In other words, unused class methods and properties won't be removed from a final bundle. And the third one is extensibility. With class-based approach, multiple inheritance is not supported. And with functional approach, with function composition, we can achieve great results. And this is one of the main advantages of the NgRx signal store. Let's now see the quick comparison between store, component store, and signal store. So it's important to mention that store and component store also have integration with Angular signals. If you're using one of them and you use store or component store.select to read something from the store, you can just replace select with select signal, and instead of observable, you will get the signal. For the local state management, signal store is successor of component store. Here it's important to mention that we don't plan to deprecate component store. It's the second most used state management solution in the Angular ecosystem according to NPM downloads. But if you want to start a new project, we recommend using signal store for the local state management. NgRx global store, the Redux store, is still a great choice for global state management if the Redux pattern is preferred way of managing the state. However, if for some reason Redux pattern is not your cup of tea, signal store can be used to manage both local and global state. Alex already mentioned this, so these are some numbers for the NgRx in 2024. NgRx store reached 600K weekly downloads. Component store is on the second place with 180K, and NgRx signals grows exponentially. It currently has, I think, more than 50K today weekly downloads. So you may be wondering what's next, what we will do next. The first thing is that currently NgRx signals package is in developer preview. And the plan is to remove the dev preview flag and release version 18.0 as a stable. So here we can see some feature requests, RFCs that are opened. We are working on them, and once we solve them, hopefully by the end of July, we will have the first stable version of NgRx signals package. And now you have a chance to see the preview of the new documentation website that we will have. It's made by our core team member, Mike Ryan, and it's built with analog.js. So yeah, let's summarize.
So a quick summary here we can do. You can see that NgRx is reliable. It's been on a long journey with Angular since basically early days of Angular 2. We've been continuously maintaining and supporting this, advancing through all the features that Angular was providing and all the features that TypeScript was providing. You can see that this library hopefully can deserve your trust in the future as well. And that would be, our summary. Like, you can rely on this, right? You can rely on this statement and solution. With that, there are certain places where you can reach us, our socials. You can follow on Twitter at NgRx.io. We have a LinkedIn page as well. We have our Discord at discord.gg/NgRx. Our docs are at NgRx.io. There's a blog as well. We have workshops that we do every so often. You can find them at tito/NgRx. And if you're curious about the code, which I highly recommend to take a look at this, it's all open source. It's at the NgRx/platform. With that, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.